my account, and I don't give you no voice on that.
بنجيب لنا وقت اللحم نحطها في الثلاجة تخرب الصبح نكبها مرمرة.
Israel has begun reducing the electricity supply to the besieged Gaza Strip by 40%, leaving residents with less than 3 hours of power a day.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org. Neo-Nazis and Klan and alt-right have been encouraged in the current political atmosphere to demonstrate and intimidate. Sometimes they call themselves white nationalists, and incredibly, some people are fooled into thinking they have a point of view. We know their point of view for 100 years: racism, bigotry, terror, and murder. In May, a Klan group had a torchlight rally.
In a protest Saturday night reminiscent of a Ku Klux Klan rally, demonstrators carrying torches demanded that a Confederate statue remain in a Charlottesville, Virginia park.
We are a people. We will not be replaced.
But when they had a rally in that same city at the start of July, they had opposition.
In Charlottesville, Virginia, more than 1,000 people protested against a small Ku Klux Klan rally on Saturday. The rally was in protest of the city's decision to remove a statue of the Confederate General Robert E. Lee. After the hooded KKK members departed, police moved in and attacked the counter-protesters with tear gas and arrested 23 people.
In New Haven, Connecticut, an alt-right group called the Proud Boys announced they were going to have a rally. They were met with a hot reception. Two groups from the so-called Proud Boys, about 3 or 4 persons each, showed up, and the crowd surrounded one group and angrily protested. The protest was made up of a large number of organizations and just individuals who wanted to take a stand against racism and the weak men who despise and hurt women. Okay, Natalie, there's people behind you, and they're gathering and they're writing signs. What's going on?
We are hosting a counter-protest today. Some alt-right and white supremacist groups around Connecticut have invited Augustus Invictus, who is a fascist libertarian former Senate candidate out of Florida, to come speak. Most of his rallies, all of his rallies have involved a lot of hate speech and a lot of overt white supremacy, and we're not going to let this stand here on the town square of New Haven, the Green.
And how is it being organized? On Facebook or some group from town?
The counter-protest has been done person to person, individually. We've sent out some last-minute email calls, but the idea here was to make sure that they didn't know that there was going to be a counter-protest organized, and so we didn't want to go public with that. We don't want to feed the trolls. We don't want them to have a reason to get defensive already and to kind of pre-escalate. Several of the groups involved in this protest are overtly violent in their missions and in their kind of endeavors and how they move through the world, and so we want to make sure that we're not that we're being very, very tactical in our approach.
You mentioned hate speech. Who do they hate?
They hate people of color. They hate Muslims, especially. They hate queer folks. They hate women. The speaker who is coming up, Augustus Invictus, was charged in Florida with domestic abuse and battery and sexual assault for shutting his girlfriend in a closet and beating her, I believe, with a gun until she blacked out. These are not good actors.
And so what, if they're having a speaking event here on the Green, what do you all intend to do?
I think we're going to do our damnedest to make sure that they don't get a recruitment video out of this. So our tactics are designed to keep our people safe from them and from police harm, and to deny them the opportunity to get a good piece of audio or a good piece of video that doesn't there's a lot of humiliation planned. A lot of this stuff stems from toxic masculinity and from like wounded whiteness. And
Black in Pink is an organization that supports LGBTQ people in prison across the country. So I'm here today all fabulous because the organizations who are coming today are full of misogynist men who really have this warped 1950s view of gender, and they're really insecure about their masculinity. And I just want to be there and say, like, y'all are cowards and I'm empowered. I'm a queer and transgender man, and I have no problem being covered in glitter. It doesn't affect my opinion of my gender at all.
The guys that are USA! No PKK! We'll never be defeated! This fascist scam is really shitty! Get your ass out of our city! Anybody's body needs to be censored. I have a censor now. The people united will never be defeated! The people united will never be defeated! No KKK, no fascist USA! No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA!
Things did get a bit ugly. A paint balloon and silly string were thrown. A photo in a local paper appears to show a woman kicking a Proud Boy in the behind. There were 4 arrests of protesters, including one of longtime community activist Barbara Fair.
This is my town, and I don't give you no voice on that.
Peace, man. We still need peace, people. We still need peace. We still need peace. Out of here.
After the rally, there were arguments among the protesters about how things went. A statement was issued by Dragonfly Climate Collective and the Connecticut IWW, which included these lines. But let's be clear about this as well. When they try to occupy space on the green, we state unequivocally that sending fascists packing is an act of community self-defense. Fascism means gangs of white men attacking anti-racist demonstrators like in Portland, Oregon, or Berkeley, California. That was from that statement. That's one point of view, but on the other hand, there are questions of law and tactics. The community does have the right to be defended from fascist mobilization, but the police were all around, and some actions can get a lot of people into trouble. Now, Katerji from the Turkish video site TRT World, who was in Gaza recently, talks about the electricity squeeze.
وين الإنسانية؟ وين الرحمة؟ كان يهودي ولا عربي؟ وين الإنسانية؟ انتوا شايفين وضع الناس، بنجيب لنا وقيت اللحم نحطها في الثلاجة تخرب الصبح نكبها مرمرة.
Israel has begun reducing the electricity supply to the besieged Gaza Strip by 40%, leaving residents with less than 3 hours of power a day.
لازم يكون في قلوبهم نسفة رحمة للشعب الفلسطيني، معي الحصار اللي فيه، معي فيش طلعات، فيش نزلات، فيش شغل.
And it is Gaza's most vulnerable residents that are most at risk.
عندما توقف قبل عدة أسابيع توقف الجنريتور عن العمل
وتوقفت أجهزة التنفس الصناعي عن العمل، واضطررنا أنه نعمل تنفس صناعي للأطفال لمدة 20 دقيقة بجهاز التنفس الصناعي عن طريق اليد. وطبعا هذا خطر مباشر على الأطفال، أنه كل طفل يحتاج إلى حكيم وطبيب حتى يتابع عملية التنفس الصناعي، وهذا ليس دائما متوفر أنك توفر ناس تقوم بعملية التنفس الصناعي. على أي حال لحتى الآن لم يلحق بالأطفال والحمد لله رب العالمين أي ضرر، ولكن طبعا المستقبل يبدو قاتم. أنه صحة الطفل الفلسطيني هي مسؤولية المجتمع الدولي. الاحتلال هو السبب الأساسي لمشاكلنا في فلسطين، وعلى ذلك لابد من ممارسة أقصى الضغوطات على كل الجوانب الفاعلة في افتعال هذه الأزمة لإعادة الكهرباء، ليس إلى 8 ساعات، إنما لإعادة الكهرباء مرة أخرى لقطاع غزة كما كانت 24 ساعة.
The current power problems are being fueled by a payment dispute between the Palestinian Authority, Hamas and the Israeli government. However, as Gaza's electricity distribution company explained, the energy crisis in the besieged Palestinian enclave predates the dispute.
شوف، موضوع الخلافات السياسية هو العنصر الثاني أو المسبب الثاني لأزمة الكهرباء في غزة. السبب الأساسي هو الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. أنا ذكرت أنه من العام 2006 بدأت الأزمة عندما أقدمت طائرات الاحتلال على قصف محطة التوليد في غزة، وكذلك في خلال الحروب الثلاث اللي مرت على غزة 2008 2012 2014 تم استهداف ممنهج لشبكة توزيع الكهرباء بشكل كامل. احنا يعني بنستغل هذه الفرصة او نستثمر هذه الفرصة انه نوجه ايضا دعواتنا ويعني مخاوفنا الى جميع الاطراف الدولية، الى الامم المتحدة، الى منظمات حقوق الانسان، من اجل الضغط على الاحتلال لوقف هذه الإجراءات تجاه السكان في قطاع غزة، لأنه هذا أمر خطير وسيمتد تأثيره ليس فقط في قطاع غزة وإنما تأثيره سيمتد على المنطقة كاملة.
Even if this power station was running at full capacity, Gaza would still be 50% short of its electricity needs. And while Gaza continues to struggle to meet its basic energy and water requirements, conditions for its 2 million residents continue to rapidly deteriorate.
اضطرينا انه نركب الواح شمسيه حتى نشغل في حال انقطاع الكهرباء، انه نشغل احنا الشغلات الاساسيه في هذا المبنى. يعني هذه مفارقه غريبه حقيقه، انه شركه توزيع كهرباء ما بتوفر لها كهرباء وبتحاول انه تعوض هذا النقص من خلال تركيب الواح شمسيه.
Another report from Katerji about Gaza Graffiti.
أنا اسمي نعيم شمسوم، طبعا من سكان قطاع غزة. صار لي تقريبا بمارس الجرافيتي من شي 7 سنوات من 8 سنوات هيك. الجرافيتي بدأ تقريبا من أيام الانتفاضة الأولى، من أيام ما كانت الفصائل بتعبر عن الأحداث الموجودة. طبعا احنا كنا مطلعين على العالم، يعني انه كيف الجرافيتي بيوصل رسالة وهيك. فاحنا اخذنا موضوع الجرافيتي من شيء اسمه شعارات وحولناه لشيء له علاقة بالشيء المرئي او الفيجوال اكثر، او الشيء اللي ممكن الناس تطلع على الموضوع بشكل ثاني. لا، كان موضوع الجرافيتي بيعبر عن الشباب، بيعبر عن المشاكل اللي بواجهها المجتمع. بس طبعا الاختلاف الموجود هنا عن العالم انه الجرافيتي هنا بيحمل رسالة اكثر من الموجود في العالم. هاي الاختلاف الموجود انه الجرافيتي هنا له قيمة اكثر من الموجود في العالم. اعتقد انه العالم برا او معظم فنانين الجرافيتي بيشتغلوا اسماء او نيك نيمز لإلهم او شيء زي هيك. احنا لا، احنا بنحكي عن رسالة، بنحكي عن قضية، احنا بنحكي عن مواجهتنا للاحتلال، بنحكي عن الحصار. الجرافيتي السبيشال في الجرافيتي انه الجرافيتي وجد في الشارع، تمام. الجرافيتي مش موجود في مش منحاز للمعارض او شيء زي هيك، ما بروح لناس معينه، يعني المعارض بروحوا لها ناس، طبعا ناس معينه، بس الجرافيتي وجد في الشارع، تمام. يعني معرض للكل. اي جرافيتي للتوعيه هذا شيء ايجابي طبعا، تمام. بس اذا كان الجرافيتي مسيس او بيتجه لسياسه معينه هذا شيء سيء، حتى لو كانت الحكومه بتستخدم الجرافيتي انها لتصحيح مسار الشباب مثلا، من شيء سلبي لشيء ايجابي، انه عدم استخدام المخدرات بيكون شيء ايجابي. بس اذا استخدمت الجرافيتي الحكومه بطريقه ثانيه اللي هو شيء مسيس، هذا يعتبر شيء سلبي يعني جدا. الرساله اللي حاب اوصلها انا واصدقائي او انا والجماعه المحيطين فيا، انه احنا موجودين، انه احنا موجودين في العالم، انه احنا مش معزولين عن العالم، لا احنا مواكبين كل شيء. احنا عندنا جرافيتي زي ما العالم عنده جرافيتي، عندنا فن، عندنا ارت، عندنا كل شيء موجود في العالم. الشيء الوحيد اللي انا اتمنى انه يصير، انه كسر الحصار الموجود في قطاع غزه. بس يعني هذا اللي بتمناه من كل شيء.
Why has Gaza been under siege for over a decade? The Israeli reasons or excuses change over time. First, it was the fact that Hamas was elected, and Israel decided Hamas was a terrorist force, so Israel therefore had the right to punish every living thing on the Gaza Strip. Then there was a soldier that Hamas captured. That's long been settled, years ago. There's also the question of rockets, but there's been almost no rockets since the end of the 2014 Gaza massacre. Nowadays, Israel doesn't even bother with reasons. They like the way things are. And they are cutting electricity to Gaza as an experiment to see how much suffering they can cause before the rulers of the world yank on their chain a little bit. As we record news of a revolting bill in Congress which would make support for BDS as a way to pressure Israel a felony. It would include civil penalties of up to $250,000 and possible criminal penalties of $1 million, and get this, 20 years in prison.
Right. Well, as you said, it's a huge priority of AIPAC. According to lawmakers that I've spoken to, that this has been something that they've been working on hard over the last several months. It was introduced in March and has bipartisan support. On the Democratic side, one of the things that I picked up is that Democrats seem to they took a lot of heat back at home when they for the Democrats who did end up supporting the Iran deal back under President Obama. And so this, to a lot of them, seemed like a bit of a small wake-up call. I think a make-up call. You know, the way that it was presented in the lobbying effort didn't talk about the criminal penalties that were associated with violating this statute. And so when our story came out and when the ACLU letter circulated this week, a lot of the people who had sponsored it were a bit surprised that they had actually backed something like this. They thought it was a rather simple kind of extension of a policy that had been in place for decades, merely extending it to the EU and the UN. But in fact, it comes with these, according to the ACLU, these draconian penalties. And so I think you're seeing a lot of them revisit it at this moment now that there's so much more public attention.
It's the Israel lobby, AIPAC's #1 priority. And the money-guzzling sheep who make up the U.S. Congress are happy to introduce it and vote for it without even reading it. Watch this piece about one of its chief sponsors.
attention on it.
I want to turn to audio of the Intercept's interview with the Maryland Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, the bill's primary sponsor. You asked him about the ACLU's concerns about the bill.
We are very sensitive to maintain freedom of speech and expression. Nothing in our bill does it.
The ACLU says that kind of the way that it's written would lend itself towards felony penalties for people if they participated in these kind of...
I didn't think we had criminal sanctions in it. We go to judiciary. I don't think we have. I just don't think that's in our bill. You're catching me without...
Sure.
I think I know the bill fairly well. I don't believe we have criminalized. I think our issue is U.S. participation in international organizations, speaking out against the UN actions. I think that's the bill.
So that is Maryland Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, the bill's primary sponsor. Ryan Grimm, talk about the significance of what he said.
Yeah, and then after that, I said, well, so it sounds like you don't actually support criminal penalties, associated with supporting a boycott. And he said, no, of course I don't. So that's not an exact quote, but it was something to that effect. So now that the ACLU letter has been made public and senators have had a chance to review it, I presume that a number of them are going to dial back their support for it. Ben Cardin is the author of the legislation, and the way that it's written, if you read the bill itself, the penalties aren't mentioned. You have to reference an underlying statute that it amends, and then once you get to the underlying statute, then you see the $1 million fine and the 20-year prison sentence, which...
So the senator who introduced the bill doesn't even know what's in it. He doesn't know there are penalties. There's huge penalties. My guess is that AIPAC wrote the bill and guided his hand as he signed it. Now hear from Senator Schumer of New York.
But sometimes anti-Semitism is cloaked, hidden by certain movements that profess no bias, but suspiciously hold Israel and by extension the Jewish people to a different standard than others. There's no greater example than this insidious effort to harm the Jewish state than through the boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. The global BDS movement is a deeply biased campaign aimed at delegitimizing the Jewish state, and its supporters, sometimes wittingly, sometimes unwittingly, but all of them practice a modern form of anti-Semitism. And we have to call them out for that.
He vomits out lies. The biggest organization in this country calling for BDS is Jewish Voice for Peace. With its 200,000 email contacts, 10,000 individual donors, and 60 chapters. BDS isn't remotely about anti-Semitism. It's about using peaceful economic pressure to try to stop some of the Israeli abuses. Don't believe me? Listen to a rabbi from Jewish Voice for Peace.
Thank you for having me, Amy. Good morning. This legislation is seeking to make it illegal for businesses to comply with a boycott of Israel or Israeli settlements that is supported by an international governmental organization like the United Nations. And I think it's trying to preempt what we're supposed to see in the coming months, a database from the United Nations that lists companies that are engaged in commerce in settlements, in illegal settlements in the West Bank.
Chances are, whether you love it or hate it, you most certainly have heard of AlJazeera, and you probably have watched it. But when Saudi Arabia and 3 Arab states called for AlJazeera to be shut down, it sparked a wave of global resistance among the media and human rights organizations. The Guardian called the attack on AlJazeera an assault on free speech to subvert the impact of media in the Arab world that should be condemned and resisted. And the New York Times editorial board said this misguided attack on AlJazeera was an attempt by Saudi Arabia and its anti-Qatar coalition to eliminate a voice that could lead citizens to question their rulers. Today, the countries calling for the shutdown, including the United Arab Emirates, where Saudi-owned Al Arabiya is based, have passed a law that makes it illegal for residents to express any support for Qatar. Otherwise, They go to jail for up to 15 years or pay a fine of $136,000. AlJazeera sees the call for its closure as nothing short of a siege against the journalistic profession itself and an attempt to silence freedom of expression in the region. So I'm here inside the AlJazeera English newsroom to talk to some journalists and find out how do they really feel about this whole situation. So how does it feel to be covering the news when you somehow are the news?
I think it's more important than ever that AlJazeera does what it's always done, which is to provide fair and accurate, balanced reporting around the world. I think this is an opportunity to show that what started many years ago as a bold experiment and was regarded as a bold experiment by many parts of the world has transformed over the years into a very legitimate news organ.
How did you feel when you started seeing all the support come in from human rights organizations, from the media?
At first, I was a bit overwhelmed because living here and then not knowing what might happen, and then seeing the support, from the Guardian, such a big organization. I had people from my background, Senegal and Paris as well, calling me, asking me how you feel, and we know that we're doing the right thing. They can't just, ask us to do things which are going to go against freedom of speech. So because this is what this whole thing is about.
AlJazeera was established in 1996. It quickly grew into a multilingual global media giant, building huge audiences in the Arab world and beyond. It broke censorship norms and reached directly into the living rooms of tens of millions of Arab households, thirsty for any alternative to state-run channels that had monopolized airwaves for decades. The truth is, AlJazeera has stirred public opinion in ways Arab governments couldn't ignore, serving as a critical source of news as the Arab uprisings rolled across the region in 2011. But like all media organizations, AlJazeera, which arrived to the region long before the internet, has made mistakes and is accused of not being critical of Qatar and of following the political agenda of its host country in its editorial line. Still, less than 10 years after its creation, AlJazeera was already ranked the 5th most influential brand in the world, behind global icons such as Apple, Google, IKEA, and Starbucks. At a time when Arab states are increasingly blocking access to news sites through draconian press laws and arresting journalists, AlJazeera Arabic remains among the top viewed news channels in the region. One thing's for sure, AlJazeera has become a news organization that politicians all around the world simply can't ignore.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this has been The Struggle.